Welcome to the Matchbook Betting Podcast as we look ahead to week 2 of the NFL season. Oh, let's not kid ourselves. We had a couple of winners last week, but we also probably had a few more losers. But let's not panic. It's week 2. I'm joined by 3 gentlemen here to get us back in the saddle. First off, in the top left of the screen, you will see Adam Chernoff. On the bottom left, you will see Drew Dinsick, a.k.a. the Wildcapper, and our very own Brad Allen down the bottom right. Gentlemen, I'm going to start with Adam first of all. Adam, key takeaway from week 1.
Well, the Bucs and the Niners couldn't put the ball in the end zone without a holding. But maybe more seriously, I think my biggest surprise probably comes late from Monday night and the Denver coaching staff being so unprepared despite having a little extra time in preseason. A lot of coaching history and experience among them, and they looked absolutely lost going into that game against the Raiders. So that was probably one that slides a little bit under the radar that not too many people are talking about, but certainly caught me off guard a lot on Monday night.
Yeah, I think most people were asleep at that stage. Drew Dinsick, what was your key takeaway from week 1?
Well, we knew week 1 was going to be tough. It's a lot of speculation about what coaches are going to do, what you're going to see. And, there's a long time for those lines to kind of get hammered into shape. And so trying to capture line value is extremely tough when you're betting into it the week of. So not a huge surprise that it was a little bit of a struggle. Would have liked to have a winning week, but not to be. My biggest takeaway was definitely Baltimore. I don't think that it's crazy to overreact to how efficient their deep passing game was. If they can consistently, make the deep pass, and you're going to have to respect that when you play this offense, then that opens up a lot for the dynamic running attack that we didn't even see. They didn't even have to use it. And I won't be surprised at all if you see them try to employ that a little bit this week against Arizona. And I think that, overall the AFC North, which we thought was going to be a very tough contest and, 3, reasonably tight teams, not to overreact too much, obviously, after week 1, but it certainly seems like it's Baltimore, clearly should be head and shoulders above Pittsburgh and Cleveland at this point. Yeah,
Lamar Jackson no longer a running back to control ball. Brad Allen, you were kind of lucky, I would suggest, with the Cardinals-Lions, but I think we were all kind of waiting around for Kyler Murray to take off there. He took off in the 4th quarter. But what else did you take away from week 1?
I'll give you 2 quick ones. One was, I guess, how little we all know, even the supposed syndicates of the world. I think I saw a stat where teams that got positive line movement, basically they were bet. Of the 13 games that saw some significant movement, I think they went 3-10, the teams that were bet. So essentially, nobody knew anything. People thought they knew things, bet based off preseason projections, etc. And I think a lot of sharp people got murdered from what I saw. And the other one that I haven't really seen cover that much, teams averaged 5.8 yards per play before Monday night, which would be the highest for an opening week since at least 2000. So the NFL, I guess, is getting what it wants with offense.
Yeah, defenses still don't matter, Brad. Love that.
Exactly.
We've got a lot to get through to today, gentlemen, so let's get at it. We're going to start with Sunday evening's game live on Sky Sports in New Orleans Saints at the Los Angeles Rams. Of course, a repeat of the NFC Championship game from last season. The Rams currently on the money line here, 1.77. They're a 2.5-point favorite on the handicap. That's slightly in from 3. It opened at 3. Total is 52, slightly trending down as well. Drew Dinsick, I will start with you first, sir. What are your thoughts on this one? Because I know on the podcast last year, we were quite heavy on the under here. Anything to be said for this one as well?
Yeah, no, I think this is still an underlook. I think these, we're not that far removed from these teams spending a lot of time preparing to stop each other on offense. I think what we saw from both teams was pretty much not a lot of new goals, not a lot of new pieces. They're pretty much going to roll out and bring, what they had towards the end of the 2018 season to the table. And then you add to the mix that Jared Goff doesn't necessarily look totally comfortable in this new offense with the offensive line pieces in front of him. Drew Brees is having a difficult time throwing the ball down the field. Now, whether that's by choice, by design, or because he is suffering from some sort of shoulder limitation is speculation. I'm in the camp of he is still limited in terms of physically being able to throw the ball accurately down the field. But I think all told, you're going to see more of a chess match in this game. I think 53 points is pretty silly, to be honest with you, especially it's going to be quite hot in Los Angeles this weekend. If you haven't ever seen games in the Coliseum, it's just a sun focuses on, both sides of the field, and sun in Southern California is not to be trifled with. So it's going to be a hot day. It's going to be a slog. And I think this is going to be a game decided by a field goal either way, but give me under 52 here for a plus money price. So, just over 2. And I'm pretty happy.
Brad, Allen, you've kind of touched on in previous articles on insights.matchbook.com. Drew Brees regression, is it a real thing right now?
It seems to me, it definitely was at the end of last season. I think the Rams picked on that in the NFC Championship game. They realised he couldn't beat them downfield, and I didn't see anything to change my mind on that on Monday night. I think I've had a small bet on this game on Rams minus 2.5, which is now 1.95. Not a big bet, but I think 3 is fair. I wasn't high on either team before the season. Probably thought both regressed to around 10 wins or so. And then I would have said the Rams' performance was slightly better in week 1. I thought they were more impressive, beating a good team on the road, whereas, the Saints kind of scraped by probably a worse team than them. So, yeah, a little bit surprised to see a 2.5. I would expect it to close 3.
Adam Chernoff, Brad is on the Rams minus 2.5 for a little bit. Drew is on the under. Which one are you siding with here? Are you going in a totally different direction?
No, I'll stick with both of those guys. I like the under here as well, quite a bit. And I think both Brad and Drew touched on exactly how I feel about both of them. I'll put a few numbers to things. And I think anyone who's read my stuff on Matchbook Insights, especially last season, knows how much I like to pick on Jared Goff. In all quarterbacks in week 1, the difference between his completion percentage and expected completion percentage was the highest negative differential of any quarterback. So that's certainly concerning, but it becomes a little bit more so concerning when you think that his depth of target was the 9th lowest. So he was making a lot of easy throw attempts, but he was completing one of the lowest rates of those attempts of any quarterback in the NFL. So that differential doesn't bode well. And it shows us that he has some accuracy issues, which is different because as much as I expected the Rams playbook to change, they were still running a lot of the same crossing routes, the mesh patterns across the middle of the field. He's familiar with those routes. He just couldn't complete these passes against the Carolina secondary that none of us were big on coming into this year. And then, of course, under pressure, he had 41 dropbacks in that game against Carolina. He went from 5.6 yards per attempt from a clean pocket and a 74% completion percentage to 2.8. I don't think you can emphasize that dip enough. 2.8 yards per attempt and a completion percentage of just 25%. So that's an enormous drop-off, one we know that exists. Certainly going to affect him throughout the course of the season, but going up against the Saints, that interior of the offensive line, the least experienced in terms of snap count at left guard, center, right guard. Saints lived in the backfield against the Texans, which, as bad as their offensive line is, probably slightly better than this Rams unit, especially in the middle of that offensive line. So certainly think there can be some pressure against Goff to make this a little bit uncomfortable. From the Saints side, touched on the Drew Brees regression. Only one attempt of 15 yards or more downfield. That was that late throw to Ted Ginn. But the big thing for me was how many of his receivers had to go down to their knees to catch balls. If you rewatch the game, there were at least 7 or 8 instances of times where receivers went down to catch it. Normally, you would sort of look at that and go, wow, the receivers made great catches. Of his 42 dropbacks in the passing situations, only 3 of his attempts were thrown into coverage where the defender was within 1 yard of the intended receiver. So he was having these open throws, putting them low, underthrowing the guys. Ted Ginn, even on that deep pass, had to break off his route. So there's, as much as it could be by design that they're sort of playing underneath and their personnel might sort of played it out a little bit, it's hard to ignore what's going on with his shoulder. Texans, a lot more forgiving of a defense than the Rams will be against him. I think this bodes well for the under at 52, 52.5, 53, anything you can grab.
Brad Allen, you wanted to come back in there?
Yeah, just one more quick point on Jared Goff's home road splits last year. They were pretty stark. Yep. Don't always put too much stock into them, but he had at home 22 touchdowns to 3 interceptions. On the road, 10 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, and about 1.5 yards per pass less as well. So pretty significant, and another little pointer that would push me towards the Rams.
Shock horror, Californian kid likes the Californian sun, guys. Seattle Seahawks and Pittsburgh Steelers. The next game we're looking. I can see Drew in the background just putting his arm in the air. And
California, sir.
You're recording inside today as well, Drew. So it must be something crazy out there. Right, let's move on to Seattle at Pittsburgh. The Steelers here a 4-point favorite. You can back it currently at 1.96 for Matchbook, and you can back them on the money line at 1.52. You're so inclined, then the Seahawks 2.83, total of 46.5, and that is trending under. I think it opened at about 47. It's 1.94 at Matchbook. Adam Chernoff, I will come to you first on this one, sir. Steelers pretty disappointing on Sunday night even, but I'm sensing there could be a good opportunity for a bit of buyback here in the Steelers.
Yeah, and I think that this is one of the classic ones if you admire, because they'll say the push-pull situation, right? So you get the Seahawks who win 21-20. People will look at that result. They'll be sort of keen to think that the Seahawks performed well in that game. Obviously, Pittsburgh Sunday Night Football, lose by 30 points. They're going to point to Pittsburgh being a little bit overrated. And we saw from the look-ahead lines, which had this one right around 4.5, came back down now 4, 3.5, pretty cheap available for the Steelers on the exchange. You look a little bit deeper into that box score, that Seattle game. They were outgained by the Bengals at home by 196 yards. In total, the Bengals exploited that coverage. Cincinnati had a passing game advantage, 234 yards to the positive in favor of Cincinnati. So a bit of a fraudulent win would be a little of an understatement in this one. And just to put into sort of a little bit more perspective how advantageous that score was in favor of the Seahawks, the Cincinnati Bengals in that game had drives that reached the 12, 27, 34, and 4-yard line of the Seattle Seahawks. Total result of that, 3 points from those drives. Seattle running against that Cincinnati defensive front, 2.9 yards per carry, and they just kept relentlessly running it in there, 25 rushes to just 20 passes, so that doesn't bode well for them. That coverage, though, really is the big thing that I'm looking for. Against the Patriots, I think that's the most underrated secondary in the league. It's hard to say New England's underrated for anything, but they play the highest rate of man coverage. They played man all day against the Steelers. We know Mike Tomlin, notorious for being a poor game planner, didn't show anything to adjust throughout that entire game. Stephon Gilmore is one of the best cover corners, if not the best in the NFL. That posed trouble for the Steelers offense heading into it. Also just a brutal spot. Foxborough Sunday night, banner-raising game. That's tough to get over. Now you're coming home to Pittsburgh. Certainly a much more beneficial spot and a much better opportunity for Pittsburgh to exploit a secondary of Seattle that's a little more gettable than years past. And I think we're going to see that come through on Sunday.
Play the hypothetical game for a second. If Steelers had won on Sunday night, what would this line be? Adam, sorry.
Probably back to 4.5, if not even higher.
Okay. Brad Allen, are you in agreement there? Are you on the Steelers bandwagon?
Again, similar, but I've gone a slightly different way. I'd prefer the over. Yeah, I mean, I think this Seattle defense is very gettable. In my insights last week, mentioned that I thought they weren't very good, but I didn't want to back the Bengals to score because the offensive line for the Bengals was so bad. That didn't appear to matter. I mean, that they were missing. That offensive line was sort of bottom 5 in the league. They're missing AJ Green, and yet they still went for 400 yards, as Adam said. So the Seattle defense by Mike Clay, who basically ranks each individual unit in the league, he's got them 25th with weakness at cornerback and safety, which they're basically the worst in the league. Seattle defense is 24th by Pro Football Focus's grades. So essentially, I don't really see them stopping this Pittsburgh defense. And, I think they are a little bit underrated by the performance they put out, Sunday night because it was so bad. But that is, Super Bowl champions, best secondary in the league. I think we can forgive that, as Adam says. But I also think the Pittsburgh D is gettable. That's, I'm seeing that ranked around 20th in the league by the same metrics I just mentioned for Seattle. And Russell Wilson, the Seahawks are quite predictable, as again I said last week. If they're ahead, they will run the ball. But if they pass, they have to get away from the game plan which they want, which is to run the ball. If you force them to pass, this is a very efficient passing offense. This is kind of top 8 in the league. So if they're forced to pass, as I think they will be, I think we could get a sneaky shootout.
Yeah, I can't understand why they don't pass more. And Adam will attest to this. As a Jets fan, having Brian Schottenheimer as an offensive coordinator back in the day, he absolutely loves the run, just like his father, Drew Dinsick. What are you feeling on this one?
Yeah, I'll go piggyback right on that point. The big wrinkle in the Schottenheimer offense that they added this offseason was more dump-off passes to the running back, which we know to be a minus EV play. So they took a minus EV offense and they added more minus EV. So good job, Seattle. Good job, especially with your $40 million quarterback back there. Also, on as far as looking at Seattle, I thought their offensive line took a step back. I thought the offensive line was kind of coming together and performing well as you got into the later stages of last season, and I thought they were unimpressive and underwhelming against the Bengals on Sunday. So, as I look at these two teams, I don't really make any adjustments to the Steelers. That was kind of like they were in shell shock. Like they were clearly distracted by all the Antonio Brown nonsense. They were clearly checked out of the game after the Patriots had a 2-score lead, and obviously. Obviously Mike Tomlin will lose games like that where he fails to make the correct adjustments, and as that got away, that wasn't entirely surprising that ended up to be such a such a huge result for New England. But I don't think it really changes how I feel about the Steelers and their talent and their abilities. And I think this should have been a game that you saw open minus 4.5, at a flat 1.9-ish. And instead they opened it at minus 3.5. So that was a good buy spot for me on Pittsburgh. I think Pittsburgh controls this one here wire to wire. And I like Brad's points a lot. I think if Seattle has to throw their way back into this game, Pittsburgh defense is going to have to look a hell of a lot better against the intermediate and deep pass than they did against the against the Patriots, because they really looked pretty poor. And I'm hopeful that they can kind of take the tape and be a little bit better prepared for those types of passes, because they were pretty poor there. So over is a solid look here, especially at 46, which I think is a bettable number. But for me, I'm on the Steelers here at minus 4.5, and I got it for 2.0.
Just want to touch on that very quickly, Drew. Could I tempt you also into a team total with the Steelers if you're taking Brad's point with the total, and if you like the Steelers to do damage against the Seahawks defense, you could play, 26.5 right now? Might be a bad angle.
Yeah, no, it's not a bad angle at all. I think the Seahawks defense was wildly unimpressive. And I think that, the Steelers really never got into the groove, never really established the kind of sequencing and play calling that they wanted, because they were on their heels pretty much out of the gate. And against a defense that I think has a lot to improve on, and maybe only one impact player in Clowney who can be neutralized by kind of the strength of your offensive line. I think the Steelers are going to have a nice day on Sunday.
Right, let's move on to one of Sunday's early games. And this is a battle, believe it or not, between two quarterbacks who are Heisman finalists. I'm pretty sure Deshaun Watson won the Heisman. But Gardner Minshew, this is the Gardner Minshew Bowl for me. He is coming out of Washington State, and he looked pretty good last week. And Adam Chernoff, I'm going to get your thoughts on that, because I think you might be slightly disagreeing with me. Texans a 9-point favorite here, 1.93. The total is 43. Come back, obviously, the Texans very short on the money line of 1.25, and the Jacksonville Jaguars just under 4 to 1 in fraction terms, 4.95. Adam Chernoff, let's go back to that. Gardner Minshew came off the bench to replace Nick Foles last week. 22 out of 25. Didn't look so bad.
Yeah, it didn't look so bad from the outside looking in, but if we do a little bit of digging, all of a sudden there becomes a little bit of concern, to say the least. So from the outside looking in, again, 22 of 25, great. 275 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. It's like pretty respectable stat line coming in given the situation. But we'll go a little bit deeper here. So 154 of his 275 yards came on touchdown drives when they were trailing by 24 and 21 at home midway through the fourth quarter. So obviously the Chiefs defense, soft as it is, got a heck of a lot softer. And I went back to just do a little bit of confirmation on the condensed game. That was certainly the case. Overall, he finished plus 16.2% between his completion percentage and his expected completion percentage. The only quarterback to finish higher was Lamar Jackson. The difference between these two, Lamar Jackson had his best game of his career, the best game offensively in franchise history for the Baltimore Ravens. Gardner Minshew averaged just over 5 yards per attempt in his passes. So not only was he completing a high rate of his passes against a very soft defense in a very favorable game state, he was doing so throwing a lot of short passes underneath that the Kansas City defense was conceding to him at a very alarming rate. You look at him as a whole in the preseason, we can take a decent sample size out of it, although it's tough to go back and make that argument for the preseason, but he had 108 dropbacks and completed just 56% of his passes against second and third string defense. Obviously, play calling has a little bit of impact on that. He was facing very vanilla defenses, very basic play calling. But you have to sort of take into account that that's maybe the baseline between this falls somewhere in between that, probably a lot closer to the 56 than it is the 88%. But certainly concerning when you give the offensive line of the Jacksonville Jaguars and some of the injuries they have. Cam Robinson's still banged up as well. So you're going into a very different environment aside from playing at home in the heat, going into Houston to play on that fast surface against his pass rush, which without Jadeveon Clowney appeared to take a bit of a step back, but going against his Jaguars offensive line, very different from going against the Saints offensive line. So you have to think at home, they're going to be able to put a little more pressure. And then of course, game plan for Gardner Minshew came in as a bit of surprise against the Chiefs, who don't adjust to anyone defensively. But that certainly sets him back a little bit. And you look under pressure, Minshew finished with a perfect 158.3% passer, or 158.3 passer rating against pressure. Pretty sure that's not sustainable over the long term. So I think that Minshew comes back to earth in a pretty significant way. He's going to be forced to throw downfield, something we didn't see him do against the Chiefs defense, doing so against the Texans, as soft as they play, a little bit concerning. Probably a big fallback game for Minshew. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't necessarily like Jacksonville at the number. I think Houston's very overrated coming off of that performance. That offensive line really got disguised a little bit by the performance of Deshaun Watson. Not a play on the side for me, but I do think under 43.5, probably the way to go between these two teams on Sunday.
All right, under the play for Adam, Drew Dinsick. Let's touch on Adam Monday night. It's a bit of a tough one for them to come back from. They should have probably won the game. But Deshaun Watson, again, great and all as he was, he took a lot of hits.
Yeah, he did. He did. And I think, that's in his nature. He holds on to the ball too long. And, the Texans continue to invest draft capital and future draft capital in that offensive line. And, he's still under pressure consistently. And the Texans overall have a lot of things that you don't like to see if you're backing an NFL team. They have a coach who leaves points on the field. Making the decision to challenge after taking a timeout was one of the more egregious coaching missteps that we saw across the entire NFL week one. And of course, it's Bill O'Brien doing it, who we've seen do this now for years. And then they make some adjustments at halftime that I thought really let the Saints back into that game. That was the Houston-Texans game to win. Their approach and what they did in the first half, I feel like daring Breeze to throw over them to beat them was the right way to play him. And they kind of roll out a prevent look in the second half. They give a lot of space to Kamara to get his speed going and be dynamic for the short passing game that really turned the table for the Saints in that second half. They should have put that game away pretty easily. Short week now. They welcome the Jaguars. This is a game that I feel like this is a free touchdown. I don't understand how we expected to see Houston -3 at home. We saw the Jaguars play relatively competitively with the backup quarterback against the Chiefs. Their defense had a terrible day, obviously, but they were there was something, they were a little bit too motivated for that game, I guess, because they were playing a little out of control. But we expected to see Houston open -3. It opens -8.5. It's bet up to -9.5. So there's been a 6-point adjustment here. And really the only thing that you've seen different is that Gardner Minshew is in there at quarterback instead of Nick Foles. That's not a 6-point adjustment in any way, shape, or form that I can tell you. And on top of that, it's a meaningful 6 points. We're going from +3 to +9.5. You're going across 6 and 7 here.
Yeah, and the other point, Drew, it's 40. It's a 43 total, and you're getting a 9.5 points.
Yeah,
it's nuts.
Yeah. And so I think if you're the Jaguars, I think you come into this game with a pretty conservative approach. You're going to try to, play a little bit of ball control. You're going to try to keep Watson off the field. I think when Houston is on the field, I think you're going to be pretty aggressive with your pass rush. I think you're going to try to hit him. I think you're going to try to sack him. I think you're going to try to disrupt him in the same way that Jacksonville has done to Houston in years past. This is a game that they can absolutely steal. I think the Texans are pretty much, one of the bigger frauds across the league, at least the way they're being power rated. And as good as Watson is, until they get Bill O'Brien out of there and they get a real GM and a real coach, I think a lot of his talent and his ability is going to be squandered in Houston.
Brad Allen, you predicted the Texans would score at least 28 on Monday night. Good job by you, sir. What are you making of this one? 9.5 is a bit steep.
Yes, I haven't had a bet because I don't know anything about Gardner Minshew. I haven't watched that game, but I have to say he's been very convincing there.
He's a great salesman, Brad.
Yeah, he might have got me because this Jaguars defense, obviously they were carved up. It's worth remembering it was Andy Reid with 8 months to prepare.
Yeah,
and he is superb. He just carved them up. So they will get pressure. They're probably a better pass rush. The teeth of that defense is still there in the defensive front, so they will get pressure. And if Gardner Minshew can play passably, they should cover the number. I think the point about 9.5 at the total of 43. I'm sure if you looked up the trend with that sort of number in divisional games with that sort of total, it'd be very profitable. So I might be in as well.
I'll tell you this much about Gardner Minshew. He's a smart guy because he played at East Carolina for a couple of years, wasn't getting noticed. They were a terrible team. He goes to Washington State, wide open offense, Mike Leach, and he gets drafted in the 6th round. He's a smart guy. So he might be able to keep it close. Here, right, let's look at one of the more interesting line moves this week. The 49ers at the Bengals. Bengals currently a 2.5 point favorite here. You can back the Bengals at 1.8 on the money line, and the 49ers at 2.18, and the total is 45. Drew, I will come to you first there, and I touched on it there. There's a huge move here for the Bengals. Is it justified?
Well, we're seeing this happen in all of these games. There's a week two situational spot that has been extremely profitable going back 4 years now, and it's when teams are on the second week of back-to-backs, they tend to underperform by about 1.5 standard deviations. San Francisco fits that. And, as you got into the betting market this week, you see them on the road as, road chalk and against a team that I thought looked very frisky in Seattle. Cincinnati was very live to win that game. And, you combine that with the fact that San Francisco was in Tampa Bay in the heat last week, played a very tough, ugly, weird game. And then now they're going to have to travel to Cincinnati. That would be problematic for them, and they might underperform here. And then you add into the mix here, they didn't fly back to San Francisco. Rather than go back to the West Coast, they chose to fly to, they used the DeBartolo connection. They fly to Youngstown, Ohio. They're spending the week there practicing, getting ready for Cincinnati, and they'll have the body clock adjustments that they need. For an early game here. But the idea that this early in the season you're taking yourself out of the normal rhythms, that you're not gonna, you're out of the normal training facilities, you're not gonna have the same, kind of ability to get your body back and your body right, is a little bit problematic. And San Francisco, weird roster construction, weird investment in the running back position, and now even those players are all kind of dinged up, and you're going to have Breed out there as your running back one. And Jimmy Garoppolo did not look especially comfortable. And honestly, it looked like they did not really buy into him being a passer in terms of when they were in the red zone. They were not giving him the opportunity to make plays. They were checking down. They were making sure he didn't turn the ball over so they could kick a field goal and get the points. That was problematic. And I think, we may see a different Garoppolo come week 8. When he's kind of fully back in the swing of things. But for now, at least, I think this is a pretty good spot to look for an underpriced home home team that is a little bit better than people thought as we head into the season.
You still back on -2.5, Joe? I presume you're on at a better price than this.
Let me see what I got. I do have -2.5, and I got it at just a little over 2. I think I was 2.05 on this. But yeah, this is, and I honestly, Cincinnati is a team that when the offseason, like way back around the draft, I was like, people are going to sleep on this team. People think they aren't going to compete. They're going to be a little bit feisty. They lose AJ Green. They have a bunch of pieces on their offensive line retire or get injured or, go on the IR. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, well, I guess they're trash now. Well, it turns out that Zach Taylor has a good scheme. He's running plus EV plays. Sequencing is great in terms of when they're running, when they're passing. Their weapons are emerging in the likes of John Ross and Tyler Boyd, and their double tight end set is just absolutely dynamic. The Cincinnati offense is going to score points. They're going to go toe-to-toe with this team. And so I backed Cincinnati at -2.5 here, expecting them to get a win by at least a field goal.
Okay, Adam Chernoff, I don't think you have a play on this one, but anything to add to what Drew had?
No, I think that's pretty well said. Watching that San Francisco-Tampa Bay game from a week ago quite closely and quite in a frustrating yelling at my TV manner, there's just something felt off about the 49ers. And I think the Drew mentioned it with Jimmy G just not looking right, but they didn't let him do anything. He had the lowest yards per attempt next to Sam Darnold, who was about 3.4. But you look at some of the throws too, everything was so close to the line of scrimmage. They were just looking slow. They were relying way too much on Coleman, trying to mix in Breida as well. As we saw with Seattle running into this Cincinnati front, not the best path to success. I don't know if there's like a conservative effort from Shanahan to keep the playbook a little more conservative in these games that don't really affect him within his division. Whether he's saving that, I don't know, but it's hard to imagine if that is a bit of a case that he's going to do anything out of conference on the road at Cincinnati. Not a favorable spot historically, as Drew mentioned. I think that's a really good point on this situation with the travel as well, adding into it. I expected a lot more from San Francisco, especially on offense. Didn't see it, and I'm not going to get involved this week trying to predict whether that's what we're going to see going forward or if that was just a standout game. But there's really nothing with this matchup that gets me too excited from the side of the total.
So, okay, too. Brad Allen, you're not excited about this one either, I'm guessing?
No, there's one potential angle I've been looking at, kind of touching, so on the Jimmy G stuff. Chris Wessling of NFL.com was talking about how he was looking tentative in the pocket, kind of turning his back to the pass rush after he's been hit, not trusting his knee, essentially, not stepping into throws, which you do see a lot after coming back after an ACL. And Shanahan's system does kind of, it requires the quarterback to hang in the pocket and then get hit. That's why so many of his quarterbacks get injured, because you get a lot of wide open receivers, but you've got to hang in there and get hit while you do it. So if he's not wanting to stand in there, if he's wanting to dump it off and run the ball, we could have an underplay. So success rate last week, San Fran, 37%. That's pretty terrible. Now Cincinnati, again, we talked about how they racked up 400 plus yards of offense, but they were kind of big play reliant. You watched that game, there was a couple of blown coverages, terrible angles from the Seattle safeties. We've kind of talked about how bad they are. So Cincinnati, they actually had 37% success rate as well, which is pretty poor. And I'm still not buying that their offensive line is much better. And given that the strength of the San Fran defense will be that defensive front with the new Bosa in there and a couple of first-round picks in the middle, I think under 45, that might be worth a look. Depending if that ticks up to sort of 45.5, 46, I might have a small play on the under.
Yeah, and it's probably a bit too early in the year to get some of that Ohio wind, Brad, but we shall check the weather forecast. Just in the morning, you love that Ohio wind off Lake Erie. Guys, last game we're going to cover in a bit more detail, Colts and Titans. Titans, Drew, they didn't, they kind of shocked us last week, 1.59 there on the money line, 3.5-point favorites right now on the main line. That's kind of trending up. I saw some 3 earlier, 44.5. So yeah, Drew, stay with you obviously for this one. It kind of screwed us last week.
Yeah, in a big way. And honestly, it's annoying when you have kind of some concepts that you think are, factors in the handicap, and you think that they work in a certain way for you, and that they end up backfiring. We were kind of of the mindset that, hey, Mayfield's a little loose with the ball when the field, I'm thinking, okay, when the field gets narrow, when they're in the red zone, he's going to, create some interceptions. He's going to take points off the board here for the Browns. That's going to make this more of a field position kind of a, field position battle game. And then lo and behold, he's throwing pick sixes, which takes this game well over the total in favor of the Titans. And that was a shock. And, overall, the Browns defense just put up quite a stinker. And I think, you have to think pretty hard about how good that unit really is, I guess. But the Titans, I thought, they showed some confidence. There wasn't a lot to really take away about their performance that I think sustains, you can say this is a team that will sustain winning over the course of the season. But here they are now at home against an Indianapolis Colts team where, 3 points home field advantage is fair for Tennessee. So you're telling me these teams are dead even? That feels like a misread by the market. I think Tennessee is a good half point and a half, 2 points better than this Tennessee team. We saw that, Indianapolis was competitive against the Chargers in LA. But for Jacoby Brissett is who we thought he is. He's a limited quarterback. He's not going to beat you with the deep throws. I think Tennessee ran some very, very clever zone defensive schemes that confused the young quarterback in Baker Mayfield in Cleveland. I would expect them to go right back to that playbook and try to confuse Jacoby Brissett here. I think the Tennessee defense is the differentiating factor in this game, and I backed them at -3.5. Actually, I went a little bit bold on this one. I'm on Tennessee -3.5 at 2.076. This is another spot where Indianapolis back-to-back weeks traveling. They put themselves out there in LA last week to really kind of say, hey, even though we don't have Andrew Luck, we're still a factor in this, in this league. And
they win that game if Vinatieri gets his kicks, Joe.
Yeah, well, yes. Although at the same time, I thought the Chargers left a lot of points on the field. There was some pretty significant rust on Phillip Rivers. I think if you play that game in the middle of the season, I think the Chargers covered the number pretty healthily, pretty comfortably there. But it was, it's everybody around Brissett really, I thought, did pick up their game in that Chargers game, and yet they still come away with a loss in overtime. That's going to be a little bit deflating. Rather than have a home game where you can kind of get the crowd whipped up that, yes, we're still a factor. Now you got to go back on the road in division. This is a tough spot for them. We talked about the situational factors where teams tend to underperform by about 1.5 points on average, by about 1.5 standard deviations underperform week 2 when they're on the road for the second straight week. So you factor that in, and I'm getting about a 7-point win here for the Titans. So I'm backing -3.5 at 2.025.
Adam Chernoff, any thoughts on this one?
I'll probably be selling the Titans throughout the season, but this is not a week where I'm going to do it. I wish there was a better opponent to back than the Indianapolis Colts. I don't think it's a good situation for the Colts at all, so it's just going to be a stay away from me. One thing to note with the Titans, Brad mentioned success rate. It's a great sort of stat to follow to just judge how teams are moving the football and whether there's any luck or anything involved. We look at Tennessee last week. They ranked very high in yards per play. They also ranked very high in success rate. But when you look at, depending on the down and distance, there's different factors that go into the yards gained to whether or not it's a successful play or not. The Titans ranked among the top in the NFL in terms of success rate. But when you look at plays that were unsuccessful, those plays were among the least successful of any team in the NFL. It's a bit hard to explain. I hope I did it well. But basically what it equates to is that when the Titans do break off a good play, it's extremely successful. But when they don't, it's very unsuccessful. So there's a big sort of difference in their play calling that's not very sustainable. And I think that we're seeing a lot more, if you're watching between the lines in that first game especially, they were very reliant on the big play. But there was a lot more negative, I thought, within the play calling and some of the plays that they ran than there was positives to take away from it. I think this defense pretty overrated. They got a pretty lucky, favorable matchup with those pick sixes supporting them as well. Against the Browns, agree that they did do some things schematically that made it a bit difficult, but I think that this is a team that Surprised to see them take on this much money early in the week with this market going towards them. Thought there might be a little more resistance with the Colts, but clearly no one's buying the Colts. I think there's just a little bit of interest in Texans that'll die off over the next couple of weeks as there's spots to play against them.
Brad Allen, any views on this one?
No, it's a tough one. I think if there wasn't this back-to-back road angle coming back from California, I think I would like the Colts here. I think that Tennessee final was misleading. As Adam kind of touched on, both the Browns and Tennessee had a 42% success rate in that game because the Titans got the big plays and they kind of benefited from the Browns shooting themselves in the foot, 180 yards of penalties, the left tackle getting himself kicked out of the game for literally kicking someone in the head. So they're probably, well, they're not as good as that they look there. Whereas Indianapolis I was very impressed with them. As you said, they probably would have won without Vinatieri. They had a 55% success rate, which is one of the best in the league. Against the Chargers, who had a 48% success rate. So arguably the Colts are the better team on the road against, like a 10-win team there. But as it's tough to quantify this back-to-back road games to start the season. So that's why I'm staying away.
Okay, I'm going to ask you guys in a second for a few other games that you're looking at that we haven't really got time to dig out. But I just want to get a couple of questions in from the Twitter audience. First of all, Kieran Ahern, he's asking about this Patriots line. Joe, I'll come to you this one first because this is rather fascinating to me. Now, he's suggesting that it gets to 21. I don't think it does. It's come back down to 18 today at the time of recording from 19. But is it too many points even against a terrible Dolphins team?
It's probably the worst line that we've seen in the NFL in the last 10 years. This is going to be a pretty competitive game. I'm staying away from it, but I think this is going to be a competitive game. You have familiarity with Brian Flores and the Miami Dolphins with the Patriots system and what they like to do. You have the Patriots flying high, coming off of a Sunday night win, now having to deal with the week of distractions with this Antonio Brown nonsense. And on top of all that, this is the Miami team. They were utterly exposed last week because they went into that game assuming they could beat Baltimore by forcing Lamar Jackson to beat them with the deep ball, and he did just that. So they gambled and they lost on that, and they lost in spectacular fashion. I still think that they're a team that has strengths on their defensive backfield. They have talented players in the defensive backfield, and New England has yet to go to Miami. Other than maybe once in the last 6 years and really outperform their expectations. Consistently, they struggle down there, and then on top of this, you're putting them, in the heat on the hot side of the field as the visiting team in the midday sun. It's going to be pretty brutal weather down there. And yes, the Patriots look like the clear and obvious favorites to win the Super Bowl, and Miami are the clear and obvious favorites to pick up the number 1 overall pick. But these are still NFL rosters, and Miami's gotten their stinker out of the way to a degree against Baltimore. So this is a pretty horrific line. I thought the look ahead -11 might have had some value to bet the Dolphins, and now it's up to 19. So this is crazy.
Take that touchdown. Take that touchdown.
I'm probably going to. I'm probably, just for fun, I'm probably going to have a Miami money line ticket at 10-1 or whatever it is, because it's just crazy. This is just crazy. We've seen crazier things happen.
19-point favorite, 2007, that Patriots team on the road to Baltimore. They won by 3. Adam Chernoff, I can see you in the quad box. Pretty nuts. It's only 10-1. It's a 2-horse race.
Yeah.
It's not going to.
No, but I didn't see that coming, and Drew just took it so calmly, collectively. He just presented it like it was no big deal. I mean, we're looking at the biggest point spread in history of the NFL. I think prior to this was Denver hosting Jacksonville. That was 26 in Denver. If we're going to do the math with this one, 19, the Miami field advantage in September is inflated. We know that. Everyone buys into that narrative. So let's give them 3. You get 22 on a neutral. If you're not saying that the Patriots are 4-point home favorite, you don't get a 4-point home field advantage against the Dolphins, that's putting this at the biggest number of all time. I think the biggest concerning thing here, and not really trying to play the narrative game, but after the game, I think it's probably common news by now, Dolphins players were calling their agents to contact management to get a trade from the team. That's not like super uncommon for them to be calling agents, wanting a trade out of a bad situation. What was concerning was they stated that there's the disbelief between what the coaches want. So this isn't like an upper management issue. This is an issue between the coaches and the players on the team. So if you get a situation where the players are quitting on the coaches, that's obviously not good for anything, right? Like that's going to be what unhinges the team. In terms of this being more competitive, it's an enormous number. There's no debating that. I think the relationship between Belichick and Flores and these two coaching staff probably prevents some late game running it up, as we saw Baltimore kind of do, going for the fake punt and whatever. That's sort of more Harbaugh's style than it is. It's usually what Belichick does. He might sort of hit the brakes considering how close these two coaching staffs are with their history working together in New England. So that might play into it. But not a game I'm touching. I think there's potentially a lot of downside with the Dolphins. I agree that no team is ever as bad or as good as they looked the week prior. I certainly think that factors in here, but it's a stay away from me. It's such a large price.
Drew, I'll come back to you in a second, but Brad Allen, very quickly. I know you well enough at this stage. You're not laying 19 or 18 points on the road.
No. Well, you also think about how Belichick works, how the Patriots work. They do play the opponent. They do adjust their game to the opponent. So I think we are likely to see quite a vanilla offense. A lot of Sonny Michel, 5 yards, quick play action. And if they're up by 20 in the second half, Tom Brady's not throwing it anymore. They are just going to run the ball all day long. There was a stat, Will Brinson from CBS threw it out, that Patriots as double-digit road favourites are 10-0 to the under Bill Belichick, which I know trends, all that terrible stuff, but it does make sense that he's not trying to run up the score. They're not about beating Miami by 40 to show how hard they are. They're playing for the Super Bowl. They're keeping everyone healthy, and they're just running out the clock in the second half.
I think, in fairness, Adam, you touched on it too. This isn't a case where he's gone back to playing Mangini back in the day where he did him over. There's obviously a good relationship with Florence there, as he's, or Flores even, as he's, ex-defensive coordinator. Drew, very quickly before we move on, you wanted to come back in on that one.
Yeah, so this reminds me a lot of and I say this because we're looking at the number and we're like, this is stupid for the NFL. This is just nonsense, right? And you kind of try to find historical examples where the number was this big. I don't necessarily want to look at the example where you had this big a number. I want to look at where you've had this big of a change over 1 week, right? We were expecting 11 here, and now we're out over, not only out over 2 touchdowns, but over 2 touchdowns and field goal, on our way to 3 touchdowns. Like, this is crazy. Like, the only other kind of comparison I could come up with was week 6. You had a situation play out where the Giants were the team was quitting on McAdoo. They were 0-5. They were headed the next week to play on prime time against the Broncos in Denver. And we were expecting a line like Denver minus 7 or so. And then it ended up opening and getting bet out to like minus something teen. Let me see exactly what it was. But it ended up being closed to Denver minus 13.5. It was over a 7-point swing. And it was all based on, they quit on McAdoo. They're going to just absolutely stink. Well, that team got up for that game. They were up for that game. They knew it was in prime time. They knew that people were talking about it. They knew that they needed to have a chance. They go on and they won 23-10. Like, crazy stuff like this happens when you see these enormous market overreactions. I don't think you can take them for granted. I think you have to take advantage of them. I think honestly we're seeing it with 2 dogs this week with Jacksonville and with Miami.
We're all on the Dolphins. Plus, I love it. Absolutely love it. Very quickly, just got one other question from Twitter from Richie Shea. I'm going to just get it very quickly from this one. He reckons the Dallas Cowboys or Seattle Seahawks are probably the 2 most overrated teams in the leagues. I know we shouldn't react too much on week 1, but Drew, I think you touched on earlier. I think the Texans seem to be your most overrated. Am I right in that one?
Yeah, Seahawks and Texans are probably the 2 for me. Cowboys, I don't think are overrated at all. I think the Cowboys are very alive in the NFC. We didn't really know. I bet the Giants last week. I thought it was going to take a couple of weeks. Honestly, I thought Dallas was going to come out a little slow and kind of figure things out, give Kellen Moore the opportunity to learn on the job. Kellen Moore's approach was so plus expected value in everything he was doing, and all of those weapons were in sync. And we weren't really sure how good the connection between Gallup and Dak was going to be. Last season they were always just a little bit off. He was always wide freaking open, and they were a little bit off. Well, that is now solved, and they don't need Zeke really, but they've given him all this money, obviously. And I honestly, I think this is an offense that is absolutely dynamic. They have a defense that is loaded with skill, and they're going to be a factor. I have some pretty significant Eagles positions, and I'm thinking now, looking at the way this Dallas Cowboys schedule sets up, they get kind of afterthoughts in the next 2 weeks with Redskins in Miami. They should get those 2 wins. This is you got to start watching pretty closely about how this team comes together.
Yeah, I was really on the money with Mike Kellen Moore take last week as well. Underrated hire or underwhelming hire. Fantastic. Love getting those wrong early doors. Brad Allen, most underrated team in the league for you? Or sorry, overrated even. I think we lost Brad. You're on mute, Brad.
Yeah, I'm always on mute. I'm an idiot. I was going to say, Drew could have been speaking directly from my brain there. I also bet on the Giants. I also have Eagles futures, and I'm also thinking the Cowboys look superb. What was it? 73% motion on their plays, 47% play action. Just all the stuff the modern Sean McVay offense is doing. They're doing it, and they've got the talent. Right, Dak's dual threat, obviously Zeke, and then dynamic receivers on the outside. Yeah, I think they're an excellent team, and I'll back them this week. So go check out Insights for a few more details on that. Most overrated team, I do think Seattle is overrated, as we've kind of gone into. They'll do for me.
Adam Chernoff, most overrated team in the league right now?
I don't know if there's one that particularly stands out. We've seen some positive adjustments for teams, but for really good reasons. Otherwise, from just a market perspective, everything's remained very neutral. And with that sentiment sort of carrying how I feel about the ratings between team 1 and 32, the team that stands out for me is the Houston Texans. And I think that was fueled a little bit by Monday night. And then also the Seattle Seahawks, just because I don't think that their performance, which should have downgraded them, really got that downgrade across the market. So those were the two that would really stand up for me from each conference.
Okay, Richie, if you're watching or listening, they agree with you on Seattle, but do not agree with you on those Cowboys. Right, guys, we're kind of almost out of time. I know we could probably spend another hour previewing the other games, but let's take a bit of a sample size of what else you've kind of fancied this week. Brad Allen, obviously, we want people to go to insights.matchbook.com to read your content. You've got 3 tips there, but anything else on the radar this weekend for you?
Anything else on the radar, says me, stalling. One, I think there's been a little bit of overreaction in this Battle of New York. We got the Bills at the Giants, and the Giants. There's been a kind of a 2-point move. Bills now favoured by 2, which, as I say, I don't think the Giants should be downgraded that much for getting smashed by the Cowboys. As I say, they couldn't have known what Kellen Moore had up his sleeve, and the Giants themselves were very successful. The offensive line looked improved. Saquon had wide open space. So at home at 2.13 at the minute, I think they should probably be slight odds on. I'd have them, 1.95-ish. So a shade of value there.
Drew Dinsick, anything else is catching your eye this weekend?
Agree with Brad on the Giants. My favorite look of the week, though, and speaking of another overrated team, the Chiefs. People think that they are right back where they were last year, scoring 40 points against the Jaguars. This is dynamic. Hold on just a minute here. You have Tyreek Hill out for 4 weeks. That is the difference maker on their offense when they are going up against other legitimate offenses. Second week again, going back to not only with the Bills, you forgot to mention back-to-back weeks on the road. I know it's only going from upstate New York to the Meadowlands, which is a huge travel spot, but what is a little bit tougher is when you're in Kansas City and then you go down and play a very physical first half. A lot of your players get banged up. We saw, ankle injury picked up by Pat Mahomes. That really changed his entire kind of conception about how long he was willing to hold onto the ball, how deep a target he was willing to go for. So I think the Raiders are kind of live here. week 2. And you're getting me out over a touchdown in division. I'm always interested anyway, especially at home. And, you know, they have a short week to prepare, but with the amount of travel that Casey's doing, you know, I'm all about taking the points with the Raiders this week. And, you know, honestly, if this is a game where you see a pretty tight contest, maybe Casey's up a little bit at halftime, you know, we would expect the fatigue to really kick in with this team's second half. And so I may be even double dipping on Raiders at the halftime if it's a favorable line.
Adam Chernoff, I could see you in the background. You were in full agreement with Drew there on the Chiefs.
Yeah, I wasn't initially. I'll say that. Like, I woke up Tuesday morning and I wasn't all the way there. We had a good conversation in our group amongst the three of us, and it really got me thinking. I went back, I did the condensed game, and I was watching. What was evident to me was we know in the John Gruden offensive system that plays are designed to be short, quick routes, get the ball at Derek Carr's hand, negate any pressure, keep the pass completion rate high, be very efficient, move the ball. There were some concerns about the weapons that the Raiders have, and that was before Antonio Brown and everything happened. But there was certainly some concern about what he had after. But the way that they were able to spread it out against the Broncos defense, a lot of people think Fangio defense, Broncos and the corners they have, that was very much under Fangio, sort of a softer zone look. He likes to have everything in front of him and then close down on it. Chiefs play a very similar style. Derek Carr was the second quickest release time across all of his passes in that game. Had a nice running back emerge out of the backfield, and Jacobs found a nice tight end target, was able to find a couple different slot receivers as well. Going on the road at Kansas City, that defense, the only thing they can do is get pressure, but because he gets the ball out so quickly, this struggle with the offensive line is negated. I think he has those underneath throws, those short targets all game long against this Kansas City defense. They can move the ball down the field efficiently. This total's going up. I think it's going to continue to go up, rightfully so. Raiders lost Abrams, their key safety. So that's going to be a blow. But again, it's negated because Tyreek Hill isn't there to stretch out that defense. So I think it's a lot of back and forth. This one stays within the number. I won me over a little more work. I like the Raiders at that number above a touchdown.
Drew, you're winning over a lot of people today.
I'm telling you.
Hopefully I'm leading us down the right road and not over the cliff with the Raiders.
Week 2, it's bounce back week. We're going to go in with this bit of confidence. Right, guys, almost out of time. I want one best bet for you for this weekend. Buzzers at the ready. Adam Chernoff. One bet.
I'll have all 4 up on the Insights article for the sake of the video. Let's go with a side. Let's go with the Raiders.
Drew, you're taking the plus, or I presume you're taking the plus start.
We'll go +8.
+8. Okay. Drew Dinsick, what have you got?
I like the Raiders too, but in the spirit of kind of mixing it up here and making it a little interesting, I'll give you a play. You're probably watching this on Thursday. I'll give you a play for this Thursday night game. Give me under 49.5 here. I have a ton of questions about Cam Newton's ability to throw the ball down the field. I think we're going to see a very conservative approach from both offenses in this game, where Tampa Bay tries to rein in their quarterback, who's a turnover machine. Carolina, by default, has to rein in their guys. And I think you're looking at a more of a 23-20 kind of game. So 49.5 is way inflated on the back of some pretty high scores over the last couple of years. So Panthers under 49.5 for me this week.
Brad Allen, best bet of the weekend.
Yeah, love that one. Cam's longest pass was 17 yards last week, and he rushed for -3, which is, that's not Cam Newton. It seemed like something's up, yeah. Best bet, we'll go with Giants 2.13.
Okay, my best bet of the weekend, under 47.5, the Chargers at the Lions. Brad, you were the only one who actually got one last week. Yeah, I just threw that out of there. Yeah, I was like, I want to stay away from the first half this week, Drew, because I did 2 first halves last week, and I don't want to talk about it. So, yeah, just want to take the full one there. That Lions defense, I think, is top 10, and Chargers burning clock in, made that point last week. 47.5 just looks about a field goal too high for me. Gentlemen, it's been an absolute pleasure. We got it through under the hour, thankfully. My bosses won't be too angry with me this week. We could have done 2 hours easily, but we all obviously have lives outside of this. Thank you for watching. Yeah, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Don't forget, if you haven't got a Matchbook account, you do want to get involved, £10 risk-free bet. And you can have it on Miami. What price are we looking at right now, Drew, on Matchbook? It's 11.0?
11.0 for a home team in division.
There you go. 10 to 1 fraction terms.
This is not college football.
Not college football. This is not Alabama at Tennessee. This is the Patriots at Miami. There you go. That's it from us. Don't forget, check us out next week. Brad will be on Thursday night. Brad will be on next Monday night as well. And don't forget, you can subscribe to the Matchbook Betting Podcast on your preferred podcast app, or you can follow us on YouTube. Best of luck with your bets. Week 2, bounce back week.